How are you, Doc? How have you been? Why don't you go back the way you came? What happened to you? Someone pulled you through a hole in the wall? Smoke Guns wasn't just a hit. For 20 years it was the most popular show on TV. With Marshall Matt Dillon at the heart, it had drama, grit, and stories that people will never forget. But even the best shows make mistakes sometimes. And the wrong kind of scene from Gunsmoke is now really popular. It's a mistake that got through edits, and you can't take it back once you see it. But that's not the only secret scene from the show's long run. It's not as boring and funny as you might think behind the scenes. Come with us as we remember how great Gunsmoke was and find the one scene that the makers definitely forgot. The Western show that changed everything. Gunsmoke was a play based on the American epic Western story, Our Own Homer and Homer. The Los Angeles Times' Cecil Smith. Gunsmoke began in 1952 as a radio show. In the 1870s it took place in Dodge City, Kansas. The American West was still wild and dangerous at this point in time. Marshall Matt Dillon, a police officer, was the main character. William Conrad did his voice on the radio. When the show later went to TV, James Ayres took over the part. From 1952 to 1961, it was on the radio. Fans of radio plays really liked it. At first it didn't have any donors, but CBS believed in it and kept it going. A lot of people still think Gunsmoke was one of the best radio shows ever. It was made into a TV show in 1955. It ran for 20 years on CBS. The first shows were only 30 minutes long. In 1961, though, it changed to an hour. That helped the show get into the stories and personalities more. 635 shows have been shown over the years. Before The Simpsons beat the record, that made it the longest-running written American primetime show. But Gunsmoke was the best show ever back then. In fact, it was one of the top 10 shows in the U.S. during its second season on TV in 1956. It was number one from 1957 to 1961. People loved how it told stories about the Old West and how exciting and dramatic it was. The show was more than just gunfights and bad guys, though. How Things Are in Dodge City. This show's story took place in Dodge City, Kansas. It was soon after the Civil War. People were starting new lives, following their dreams, and sometimes making trouble in the town. Marshall Matt Dillon was in the middle of it all. In a place where danger was always close, it was his job to keep the peace. Dillon wasn't by himself. His cops helped him. Chester Good came first, and then Pheasas Hagen. Being faithful, both of them didn't know what to do when Matt wasn't around. There was also Doc Adams, who was the town's doctor. He was smart and loving, but some of his patients didn't like how he did things the old-fashioned way. There was also Miss Kitty Russell, who ran the bar. She and Dillon were close, but they were never shown to be dating. In most Gunsmoke scenes, people trying to get to Dodge from the outside had trouble. Matt had to leave town sometimes, so the cops had to handle things on their own. These scenes made things more tense and showed how much Dodge City depended on Matt Dillon. The show wasn't all serious. There were also funny parts. Doc, Pheasas, and Chester often added funny parts to keep things from getting too serious. It felt like a real world, not just a TV show, with that mix. From short stories to a whole tale. In the show's early years, shows were half an hour long. These older shows were called Marshall Dillon when they were shown again later. The show was called Gun Law in the UK. In 1961, when the shows were cut down to 1 hour, the stories got even better. We had more time to learn about how the people lived and how they felt. That's one reason the show went on for so long. It grew as its fans did. Gunsmoke kept going, even though other westerns ended and began again. During its run, 30 other western shows ran, but none of them made it as long as Gunsmoke did. By the late 1960s, CBS even planned to end the show. People did not like it as much as they used to, but they had something to say. Fans were mad. The story got so big that Congress heard it, and William Paley's wife, Babe, asked her husband not to stop Gunsmoke. CBS moved it to a different time spot to keep it alive. The move worked every Monday at 8 p.m. The scores went up once more. It was back in the top 10 for a few more years. Even big westerns like Bonanza and Alias Smith and Jones didn't last as long as it did. Those shows stopped in early 1973, but Gunsmoke kept going. The last few days and a quiet farewell. Even though Gunsmoke was a big hit, CBS finally chose to end it in 1975. Everyone was shocked by how they did it, though. People who worked on and in the show didn't even know it was ending. CBS didn't say anything to the press. There was no farewell or special show at the end. Marshall Dillon was played by James Aries, who said, "We didn't do a final wrap-up show. We were all hoping for 1 or 2 more seasons, but the network never told anyone they were thinking about ending the show. Instead, the cast and crew read about it in trade papers." After 20 seasons and 635 episodes, Gunsmoke was over, but it had already made a name for itself. It won 15 Primetime Emmy Awards and stayed in the Nielsen Top 30 even in its last year, which is unusual for a TV show that had been on for 20 years. But the fans didn't stop loving it. 5 made-for-TV movies came out after the show ended, giving them more time with the characters they had grown up with. People still talk about Gunsmoke. It wasn't just a Western, it was an important part of American TV history. It had drama, humor, and lessons about life all in one show. With that kind of history, it's not surprising that fans are still finding things that were cut out. One of these scenes has everyone talking. You see, Gunsmoke wasn't just any show, it was a true TV legend. It ran from 1955 to 1975, making it the second longest running show in TV history. People loved the show's exciting stories, sympathetic characters, and Old West style. It made new stars and gave older, more experienced actors big roles. Fans still talk about it, and for good reason. With 635 episodes over 20 years, there are many stories behind the scenes that most people don't know. The actors and crew still share details that can surprise fans who have come along for the ride. The show had a lot of secrets, like how they chose who to cast and how to set up the set. One of the main reasons it did so well was James Aries, who played Marshall Matt Dillon. He never left. Many actors leave shows for other roles or personal reasons, but Aries stayed the whole time. Aries was the main character in every episode, even when he had a small part. Only Kelsey Grammer played a single character in more episodes than Aries, but Grammer's early appearances were often short. Aries was the star of the show. John Wayne played Link and Miss Kitty played Secret. It's a myth that John Wayne was first offered the part of Matt Dillon, but that's not true. Charles Marquise Warren, who directed some episodes and knew Wayne well, says that was never the case. Warren said that Wayne lived close by and that we met at his bar to hate TV. Wayne hated TV. Wayne's suggestion that James Aries play the part changed everything. Amanda Blake played Miss Kitty Russell, who owned the Long Branch Saloon and was in over 500 episodes, but her character was mysterious, especially in the radio version that started it all. Kitty is just someone Matt has to visit every once in a while. The show's creator Norman MacDonald said about her real job. Time magazine said, "It's clear she wasn't selling chocolate bars." Fans have always been curious about Kitty and Matt's relationship. Many wanted them to have a love story, but they never did. She'd love Matt to say, "Kitty, let's buy a piece of land and raise some beans and kids, but then we'd have I Love Lucy out west." Amanda Blake laughed. James Aries agreed. They might have thought you could only take it so far. In order for Matt and Kitty to have a love story on TV, they would have to get married first, which would mean a different show. That's why their link stayed clear but quiet. Always there but never fully shown. The way they were together gave the show more meaning without changing what it was about. But even stranger things were going on behind the scenes. There were ones that had nothing to do with love. James Aries gave Gunsmoke a lot more than just time. He was hurt, came up with catchphrases, and told stories you didn't hear. As a young man, he fought in World War II. In 1944, during the Battle of Anzio in Italy, he was hit in the lower right leg and foot by machine gun fire. He got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, but the wound broke him for life. It changed how the show was shot too. The parts where he walks had to be filmed early in the morning, when it hurt the least. Aries kept going even though it hurt, because he cared about the show. It stayed steady. It's not often that people are that dedicated for 20 years. The show has also changed the way people talk. Have you ever heard someone say "get out of Dodge"? It means quickly leave this place. Because of Gunsmoke, that term became well known. Kids started using it a lot in the 1960s and 1980s, but they didn't know it came from a TV show. Dodge City wasn't just a Star Trek show. It became a sign of danger and safety. Firesmoke had a huge group. There were a lot of guest stars and 10 main characters. Burt Reynolds even played Quinn Asper for a short time on the show. As a half-native character, Asper wasn't allowed to drink and Dodge. Reynolds went on to become a big star in Hollywood. But he was just another face in Dodge City for a while. There was more than just Gunsmoke on the screen. Off-screen it had power too. Gunsmoke has a lot of power behind the scenes. CEO of CBS, William Paley, didn't like the show Gilligan's Island very much. He didn't see how a story about people being stuck on an island could stay popular, but the show did well, so he let it go on. Until Gunsmoke was in danger. It was almost time to end Gunsmoke in 1967. It wasn't doing well, and CBS needed the time spot. Gilligan's Island was in the 8 p.m. spot, and doing well, but Paley really liked Gunsmoke, and made his own decision. He took Gilligan's Island off the air and put Gunsmoke in its place. The Western story quickly picked up again, and it ran for 8 more years. One choice changed what would happen with both shows in the future. There was no more Gilligan's Island, but Gunsmoke kept going strong. Having the right fan in the right place of power saved this show, which doesn't happen very often. Gunsmoke was more than just a TV show. With the help of its cast, fans, and some risky choices made behind the scenes, along with star cameos and surprise links, the show was able to stay on the air for a long time. Gunsmoke has had a lot of famous people on it over the years. Some of them were already famous, while others became well known after the fact. Several Star Trek actors were on the show, which was one of the most surprising things. In the show Quaker Girl, William Shatner, who is best known as Captain Kirk, had a part. Between 1961 and 1966, Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, also showed up more than once. In an episode called Indian Scout, DeForest Kelley, who played Bones on Star Trek, made an appearance. There was even James Dan in Quint Asper Comes Home. He played Scotty. But that wasn't the end of the crosses. Some actors from the Brady Bunch were also on Gunsmoke. Chris Knight, who played Peter Brady, was in season 14 of The Miracle Man. In the same season as Eve Plum, Jan Brady played Sue on Gold Town. Sue Olson, who is better known as Cindy Brady, was in 2 different shows in seasons 14 and 15. These were not the only famous people who showed up. For a while, Charles Bronson was known for playing tough guys. In The Killer, he first played a bad guy named KGO. In fact, he came back later to play the same part again. David Carradine, who you may know from Kung Fu, shows up as a horse thief. Plus Leslie Nielsen, who played a gang boss in Naked Gun, played a gang leader. Nick Nolte, Dennis Hopper, Kurt Russell, Richard Dreyfuss, Sam Elliott, and even Harrison Ford, who would become stars later on, also showed up. It is amazing how many famous people from Hollywood went through Dodge City before they became famous. It wasn't always as grand at the end of the show as the list of guests though. A quick end and more fights than ever before. A lot of Gunsmoke fans thought the show would end with a proper goodbye after 20 years of steady stories, but that never happened. CBS canceled the show with no notice. Later James Ayres said, "We didn't have a final wrap-up show. The 20th year was over, and we all thought there would be another season. There were no goodbyes on screen, and there was no final message to the audience. The cast and crew still got a second chance. They came back for 5 made-for-TV movies. It wasn't quite the same, but fans got to spend more time with their favorite characters. Gunsmoke had a lot of gunfights. Marshall Trimble, a famous Wild West historian, says that Matt Dillon killed 407 people in the TV show and the movies that came after it. Some of those people lived, but most didn't. Gary Busey played the last on-screen death in the last episode. His character died of a brain tumor, which was the most dramatic moment of the show.
But before Arness was cast, producers looked at 26 other actors to play Matt Dillon. One of them was William Conrad, who had already played a U.S. Marshal on radio. In the end, James Aress got the part, in part because John Wayne recommended him, and the rest, as they say, is history. Gunsmoke ended in 1975, but it stayed famous. For decades, it had the most episodes of any scripted prime-time show. The Simpsons finally aired its 673rd episode in 2020, breaking that record. Times and public pressure. In the early years of Gunsmoke, the opening credits showed a gunfight. Every week, viewers would see Matt Dillon draw his gun. It was exciting and dramatic, but some people didn't like it. As the Vietnam War went on and protests grew, people had different views on violence. People began to wonder if it was okay for TV to show gunfights every week, so the show's creators changed things. They took out the gunfight from the opening and used a new, less violent one instead. This showed that even a strong show like Gunsmoke had to change with the times. And things didn't stop there. It was already known that James Aress was very tall, 6'7", but he started to have arthritis, which made it hard for him to shoot scenes over several days. To help him, the production team started filming all of his scenes in one day, so he could rest instead of working long hours over several days. There were even cigarette ads in the world of Gunsmoke. For the first 7 seasons, the show was sponsored by L&M cigarettes, and James Aress's face was on ads telling people to watch L&M's Gunsmoke every week on CBS. Back then, there were tobacco ads everywhere, even near schools, and some doctors were even in the ads. Of course, the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act of 1970 banned all cigarette ads from TV. That was the end of L&M sponsorship, and the beginning of a new age in TV. From radio to TV history, Gunsmoke was a hit on the radio before it ever came out on TV. When CBS first started out, there were more radio shows than TV shows. William Paley was in charge and helped keep Gunsmoke alive on TV. He wanted a Western show for adults, not kids. Other shows like The Lone Ranger were fun, but they were made for younger people. Paley wanted something more serious, so CBS made Gunsmoke Radio. It was darker and had more adult themes. Many of the stories were intense and emotional. When the show moved to TV, some of the radio actors tried out for the same roles, but none were picked because the producers wanted new faces on the screen. Author John Meston's voice stayed with the show though. Many of the early radio episodes were written by him. When the show moved to TV, he rewrote those scripts and turned them into the classic episodes we know today. Going from radio to TV wasn't easy, but it helped Gunsmoke build a strong foundation that saw the show through 20 years of change, growth, and unforgettable stories. The cast grew, changed, and added even more heart to Dodge City over the years. Behind the scenes, Ken Curtis wasn't always Fizz Hagen. In fact, he played other small parts in the early days of Gunsmoke, including a cattleman who didn't make it past the episode. But in episode 13 of season 8, Curtis introduced Fizz Hagen, a character that would become a fan favorite. Fizz was funny, loyal, and full of personality. The character was based on Curtis's childhood friend Cedar Jack, a man who made cedar fence posts. Glenn Strange, who played bartender Sam Noonan, also had an interesting background. Before he played Dodge, he was better known for playing Frankenstein's monster in 3 Universal movies after Boris Karloff quit. He even made the monster role funny in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948. Gunsmoke was his last job before he died of lung cancer in 1973. Fans of Glenn Strange will remember him in more ways than one. His co-star and friend Buck Taylor honored him by naming his 3rd son after him. This shows how much the cast loved and respected each other. Dennis Weaver, who played Chester Good, also had an interesting beginning. He thought he was auditioning for the lead part of Matt Dillon at first. Weaver later said, "I stuck my head back in the room and said, 'Are you sure you didn't want me to read for Matt Dillon?' He thought the Chester role was silly, but the producers already had someone in mind. He used a different accent on his second try, which was the deciding factor. Secrets, regrets, and changes that made the show what it is today. Things moved quickly after Weaver agreed to play Chester. But while Matt Dillon was being tried out, a new problem came up. There were times when Dennis Weaver looked like the lead because he was so likable on TV. To fix this, the team asked him to make Chester have a weird trait. Weaver worked on his limp at home in his backyard and then brought it to the movie. As much as it worked, he felt bad about what he did. He had that limp the whole time. Gunsmoke had to change over time. It went on through big changes in American culture. From the early days of black and white TV to color, and from the peaceful 1950s to the turbulent 1960s and 1970s, the show found ways to stay alive. That meant changing based on what viewers wanted, other shows competing with it, and even protests against the war. It also came back in the 1990s with 5 made-for-TV movies, which shows how many fans there were still. Not even the main characters were fully formed at first. Milburn Stone played Doc Adams, who had no first name for 16 years. He had a long history. He went to school for medicine in Philadelphia, worked for riverboat gamblers, and knew Mark Twain. They never did give him a real first name though. At last they let Stone pick it out himself. He chose the name Galen, which stuck. Amanda Blake was on the show for 19 years and played Miss Kitty Russell. She worked hard to get the part. She was excited when she heard that Gunsmoke was moving from the radio to TV. She told them she kept calling the producers until they gave her the job. She did leave before the last season though. The death of her friend Glenn Strange, who worked behind the bar at her pub, was a big reason. By the way, Gunsmoke won more than just hearts. It also won awards. There were awards, missed chances, and a woman who said no. The show got a lot of praise for its writing, acting, and production as a whole. The show got 15 Primetime Emmy nominations and 4 Golden Globe nominations thanks to its cast, which included famous people like Hank